All right, welcome to our webinar on planning your best fly-in ever. We are blessed today to be with Nicole Tisdale, the founder of Advocacy Blueprint and the author of Right to Petition, a practical guide to creating change in government with political advocacy tools and tips. Not only has she done congressional trainings in government affairs consulting, she also worked on Capitol Hill for a decade. So a lot of her advice comes directly from experience of both effective advocacy and some pretty cringy meetings. I'm Patrick Haley. When you get emails from Patrick from Quorum, that's me. I'm also a federal customer success manager here. Today, we're going to go through step 1, planning your fly-in, step 2, executing your fly-in, and step 3, managing effective follow-up. And then lastly, we'll do some Q&A. Down at the bottom of your screen, you should see a little button that says Q&A, and that's where you can post your questions. Shameless plug for Quorum. Quorum is public affairs software that helps you work smarter and move faster. So you're able to map your policy landscape, track things like bills, regulations, issues, and dialogue, and then directly change by impacting officials and your stakeholders, and then being able to report on your work. Along with that, we also have unrivaled customer success. And speaking of that, if you're a current Quorum client, we will have your customer success manager reach out to work with you on how you can integrate what we're covering today for your own fly-ins and advocacy days. So first, we're going to start off with a little poll. Does your organization currently host an annual fly-in? Yes, we have been hosting fly-ins for years. Yes, but it's been a relatively new part of our strategy. Or not yet, but we're thinking about it. All right, it looks like we have a lot of fly-in veterans with us and a few folks who have not done fly-ins before. Nicole, I think this is going to be a really great conversation for everybody who's done fly-ins before, who hasn't. It's never a bad idea to learn a little bit more about the process.
I agree.
All right, so let's go ahead and end that poll. Looks like we're at 60%. We've been hosting fly-ins for years. All right. So that's enough from me. Let's talk to the person we're actually here to get some info from. So Nicole, first we're going to start with planning your fly-in. Why should an organization host a fly-in?
Well, thank you, Patrick, and the entire team here at Quorum. That's a really good question, and I like that 60% of the people that were polled said that they've been doing fly-ins, but I also like that there's a fair number of people who are just in those phases where they're trying to decide if this is something that they want to do. And the reason I kind of encourage organizations to host fly-ins is because I think there are a number of advocacy acts that are best for different locations. So I always tell people there are certain requests that you're going to be making from public officials or their staffers that just lend themselves to do it in person. So the way I tell people to think through this is think through what type of ask you're going to be making and where's the location that it would actually be carried out. So if you're making legislative asks, like you want a bill introduced, you're trying to collect co-sponsors, that work is going to have to happen on Capitol Hill or in the State House. And so that's the kind of thing that you request in that office directly. Like if you're talking about oversight ask, those are congressional hearings. That is going to be briefings from agencies. That kind of stuff is going to happen in the State House and on Capitol Hill. And if your advocates or your government affairs office knows that that's the thing that you're going to be having your advocates do, the fly-in is the perfect place because you're already at the location where the activity would take place.
That makes a lot of sense. So how should you prepare your advocates in advance of a fly-in?
The thing that I have to make sure everybody in government relations, like every staffer, and I'm always very candid with people, the job that I have now, teaching people about Congress and talking through, these are things that any staffer would tell you if they had like 3 hours to like sit down and tell you all the things that are in my book. But also if you just had them in for an hour, they would share these things with you too. And I think the hardest thing when you're on the other side of that table with us as a staffer is you just see people are overloaded with information. And so I would really caution government affairs offices from giving their advocates too much information. And then the second thing is just not fully explaining the information. So we have a lot of people over the course of 10 years who would come and they say, and I'll just use this as like an ongoing example, we're collecting co-sponsors. We want your boss to be a co-sponsor. But I know that they really have no idea what a co-sponsor is, right? Like they know it's going to be someone that's going to like sign onto a bill. But what I think government affairs professionals can help with the advocates is don't take for granted that they really understand your strategy behind why you're trying to get a member to be a co-sponsor. Explain to them, we've gotten this bill introduced the last 3 Congresses, but we can't get the committee to move it. And so we're, from a strategic standpoint, our goal is to get 100 co-sponsors because your government affairs team is going to come back once we get 100, and then we're going to pressure the committee to at least consider the bill and mark up the bill. That's one of those things, like it doesn't take a whole lot of time to explain that. You might have to kind of walk people through it a little bit, but it's going to make a much better presentation when they sit down with me and I should tell everybody I just left the Hill this summer, so my pronouns are still messed up. I still say I and we and me, them. When you sit down with a staffer, it's going to be a much more thoughtful conversation because now they understand why they need this person to co-sponsor a bill too. And if it comes up, it's a question that they can answer.
Yeah. So when you're preparing your advocates, it's not just, hey, here's the weeds of the issue that we're working on, but it's also like, why are you here to be talking to them? Right?
Yeah. Everybody I tell people I'm really into like college football. And so I love going to Ole Miss football games, but what I really love is listening to the commentators because they can explain the strategy or what they think the strategy is. And so it's the same way with your advocates. I recognize you don't have a lot of time with them, so you don't have to get them into the minutia of the full strategy, but just let them know, like, you're on our offensive line, and this is what you're doing for us today, and this is how it fits into the bigger strategy.
So what materials should they bring to a fly-in?
I really, even us saying materials is plural, y'all, if we could just less is more, less
one
really,
material. Yeah.
One material. I know everyone tries really hard to keep everything to one page, but I really just have to restate that as much as possible. You want to keep it a one pager, and then you really want it to be high level text and then good visuals. So the visuals they're the best cheat that any staffer can have because it helps us remember the issues. And then I say the high level text because I've seen people over the years get really creative with a one pager. So they're like, we kept it in one page, but it's blocks and blocks of text. It's like 10-point font. It's like bold and underline and all this stuff. And it's like, all right, you cheat. It's like cheating the margins when you're like writing a paper. And so I would say one page, yes, you can use front and back if it's absolutely necessary, but it's high level. And keep in mind, that's also how staffers think too. Whenever we would get new staffers on the committee, I would tell them, like, anyone can explain a 200-page GAO report in 6 pages, but you don't have 6 pages, you have 1 page. And so when you're delivering materials to staffers, a lot of the memos that we're writing for our members, but also, committee staff, the talking points that we're writing, all of that stuff is a page. Like, we're trying to get all of that stuff to a page. And so when you show up with something that already looks like the documents that we prepare, you're already a step in advance or a step ahead of everybody else.
Got it. Yeah. So which staffers should my organization try to meet with?
Whoever wants to meet with you. No, seriously. Don't get hung up on staff titles. Far too often, people, it's kind of this idea that if you're not talking with the top person, the number one person, then the meeting hasn't been successful. And one of the things that I just try to point out in my book, but also just the reality is, titles are so different and they vary completely. So by the time I left the committee, I was director of intelligence and counterterrorism. I was director of outreach and coalitions. I was co-director of election security. It's like, depending on who is coming to meet with me, they don't care that I do coalitions, right? Like they want to come talk about terrorist organizations, or they absolutely don't want to talk about terrorist organizations. They just want to come talk about developing a better relationship with the business industry. And so if people were trying to filter through if they wanted to meet with me based off my title, they probably wouldn't have gotten to me. And so you just have to know that when your request is going into the office, you're meeting with the person that you're supposed to be meeting with. And if that means that there's a change out in the staffer, like the day of the meeting, people change portfolios all the time. People change titles all the time. And so don't get hung up on the staff titles. It's more about explaining this is the issue that we want to come in and talk about, and just knowing that the office is giving you the right person. And then the second thing, people get so disappointed when members can't join their meetings. It's like the saddest thing in the world for them. But I just tell them, I'm like, here's the thing. We get it. Like members of Congress and elected officials, they're the celebrities. Like every staffer knows that. We know we're like the roadies, like we're the crew team. But the truth is, even if you get a member into a meeting and they love what you're saying, your relationship is going to be with that staffer going forward, right? Because the staffer is the one that's going to have to write the legislation, or that's going to be working with you while you're trying to write the op-ed. And so I know people want to meet with the member, but if your purpose is to kind of have a dialogue about some type of legislative ask or some type of oversight ask, you really just want the right staffer too. Now, I don't want anyone to leave this webinar and say, Nicole said, don't try to even meet with the members. Like, yes, like sometimes the members want to put a face with the issue as well. But just don't be disappointed if you can't get the member meeting.
Yeah, great. All right, so that's all about preparing for it. Step 2 is about executing on your fly-in. All right, so we're in the office. Now what? What makes an effective meeting?
The best meetings really are conversations. So I tell people, and if there's like one legacy that I want to leave in the like advocacy training world, we have got to get advocates to stop memorizing pitches and speeches and coming into congressional offices and state offices. And I tell this, like, I want to be really candid with people. Here's the thing, like once you come and you start advocating in a state house or on Capitol Hill, you're in the major leagues, right? So people are already nervous. I know there's a comfort in having a pitch. And if you're running a GR shop, you've like given it to everybody. So there's this hope and this prayer that they're going to just stay on message. And I get that. But it makes it very hard to connect with the person that you're talking to. So like today, we're having a conversation about what a fly-in looks like. I didn't show up and say, I'm going to give a 1-hour keynote about how a fly-in works, and it's going to be awesome. But that's what happens a lot of times in these meetings, and people come in, and staffers are going to always be polite, right? And members are going to be polite. And so they have like 3 to 5 minutes of uninterrupted speech. And it just makes it harder for us to connect with whatever the issue is. And even if they're trying to personalize a story, there's just no place to like jump in without being rude or, messing up someone's flow. And so what happens is you wait for someone to finish, and then you may have to go back to something they said the first 20 seconds or the first 2 minutes into a speech. And it just makes it hard to connect on a personal level when someone is kind of giving you a speech.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of my clients, when they're using the Download Center, they'll put in just bullet points instead of doing the whole paragraph of what, the speech is. So they know like what to say, what the big stats are, but not like the full speech, like you said.
Yeah, I like that idea. I like bullets. I tell people in some of the trainings too, like you can start off with a question, right? So the best way to start a conversation is to say, hey, so we're here to talk about funding for cancer research. Has anyone in your family or anyone close to you been impacted by cancer? Unfortunately, that is the type of question that most people are going to have a yes. And so you can, if they want to share with you, they will share with you. And if they say yes, but it's not something that I like to discuss, you can go from there, but you've already gotten me engaged, right? Like you've already pulled me in. And so whatever you're going to do next, like you already have my attention.
Totally. So What makes a good story to share in a fly-in?
Good stories in fly-ins are just like good stories in life. So good stories have really good visuals. They have a lot of color and they have a lot of emotion. I think this kind of goes back to the previous thing. If you're trying to make people memorize a speech or a pitch, it kind of takes the personality out of it. And so the best way to let your advocates deliver a story is let them deliver the story. Like don't make them polish it so much that it's not even personable anymore. The truth is staffers know this. Like we know the people that are coming to talk to us, they're coming to talk to us about issues that are important to them, but it's not necessarily something that they do every day, right? They're flying in to do, they're doing a fly-in, not coming to the Hill like they do Monday through Friday. So we don't expect them to be able to do a deep dive in the policy. But if that is meeting number 50 of 100 of a day, the thing that's going to keep your attention is because Patrick told a really good story and it drew me in. And so when it's time to talk about the policy, like you already got a friend in me, right? Like I'm going to be ready for it. And so, yes, you got to have, and when I say visuals and stories, like if there are analogies that you can make, if there are current affairs that you can kind of pull in and you can show the similarities, all of that stuff works. And then, and we'll talk a little bit more about this in the follow-up, but also make sure whenever your advocates are bringing these stories to the Hill that you're also capturing them electronically. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in like how to do an effective follow-up. But the electronic versions of the stories just make it a bit easier for staffers to find that information when that issue comes up. And we'll talk about that a little bit later.
Totally. One thing I loved that you said before was tell your advocates it's okay to be corny. It's okay to be cheesy. Tell your personal story.
It is. Like, I mean, here's the thing. I always share, it's so, you're so strapped for time and it's very easy for the days to just kind of start to run together. And so I do say this in the book. I'm like, you know, if you got a corny joke that like some people have been laughing at or not, like I'm kind of in the corny joke. So I always laughed, but I'm also the kind of person, if they fall flat, I'd be like, that was good. I mean, I get what you're trying to do here. But that goes back to just remember your advocates are sitting across from a person. And the more personable you can make these meetings, the more memorable they're going to be, but also the more likely you're going to get follow-up.
Yeah. So you've highlighted what makes a good meeting, but what should you not do?
So I know no one on this webinar would ever do this, but sometimes the advocates and their GR teams forget that the meetings are not all about just your organization. So one of the things I talk about in the book is, you know, petitioning your government is a 50-50 partnership. And so if you're coming in, of course, you know, they're public officials and no one takes this job because they don't want to be helpful. But you've got to be able to show the request that we are making is also going to advance your policy agenda. It's also going to advance your policy career. And what, if we go back to the co-sponsors, what that looks like is, you know, we know that this is an issue that you care about a lot. And we know that you have introduced this bill for the last 3 Congresses. The reason we're trying to make a push on co-sponsors is because we're really trying to help you get this across the goal line. Like the goal this Congress is to get it through the House. And so that's the place to make sure you start offering your tools too. So you go in and you say, because it's important to you, it's important to us. These are the other 10 offers we're going to today to try to get co-sponsors. Are there any other offices that you think we should go to? Like, go ahead and volunteer. Like, I'm not just coming here asking you to do something. Here are the other things that I'm doing to make sure that we both get across this goal line.
Totally. It's a partnership.
It's a partnership.
All right. So that's a bit about in the meeting itself. And step 3 is about managing that effective follow-up that you were talking about a little bit before. So the question is, what follow-up is effective after a fly-in?
I think, so the best follow-ups, if we break down like the anatomy of a good follow-up, the first thing is to always make sure you say thank you. It's like, I feel like my mom and like every grade school teacher I ever had, But one of the things, so I left the Hill this summer after 10 years. I still had every handwritten thank you note that I had received. I also had, whenever people would send me good email thank yous, I would print them off. And here's the thing, I didn't have a banker's box full of thank you notes because it's one of those things. I think people they're like, it's your job. Like, you have to do it. And it's like, well, yeah, but if people are taking the extra step and going the extra mile, we would never go to a job interview and not tell someone thank you for interviewing us. But there's this kind of dismissive nature that happens, I think, sometimes with staffers. So the best thing is, when you send that follow-up email, the first thing should be not just a generic thank you, but tell them why that meeting was important and thank them for taking the time and talking with you and offering to help.
Yeah.
The second thing is, you really need to send digital copies of all the materials and visuals that you share. And I do want to take a little bit of time to just kind of explain what that means, because what happens is you get an email and people attach file after file after file. They're all PDFs, and that makes us just want to put it in the trash because I can't do anything with it. So when you're sending electronic files as a part of your follow-up, make sure they're files that can be edited. So, if you're going to send me, if there's a visual and I make a comment in a meeting like, this is a really good visual, make sure that it's in a format when you send it to me afterwards that I can edit it, because committees have different requirements for what kind of visual aids they can use and the format that it has to be received in. And the floor of the House and the Senate has different requirements. So I always tell people, I'm like, you're at a visual can serve 20 different purposes, right? So it can end up on social media, it can end up on the website, it can end up in a congressional hearing, it can end up on the floor. But there's so much work that goes on for staffers to create those visuals. I like to remind people, especially on Capitol Hill and probably most of the state houses too, it's a lot of liberal arts degrees in these offices. And so graphics are not our thing. So whenever you see a member that's like on the floor with this great visual behind him, it's some poor staffer was up to 3 a.m. trying to and I know this because I was that staffer, you're there and people are pulling out glue sticks and doing all this stuff. But it's because we have to take these visuals through so many different, I guess, formats before we're finally done with them. But the second thing is, you really just want us to be able to search. So now that I'm off the Hill, I have access to a lot of different productivity tools and features, but especially in the U.S. Congress, they limit, because of security reasons, a lot of the technology that we can use. And so one of the things that we used to do when we have a follow-up meeting, people send their package, you create a folder and you put it in there. If you sent me something that I can't search for, when I now need to write talking points or write a story about cybersecurity, I can't find your materials because you sent something that I just can't access. And then you're relying on a staffer's memory. And so just making sure when you're sending these digital copies that they're useful digital copies. And then the last thing is just to remind the staffer. So this is the follow-up email. Remind the staffer of the action items that each of you said. And so one of the good thing I think advocates can do, and GR teams can kind of encourage this too, is you want to remind them what you said you were going to do. So you tell them, I know there are a couple of stats that you asked me for, and so it'll probably take me 2-3 weeks to get them, but I'll be sending you another email in 2-3 weeks once we have those stats. And then also, if they promise to do something for you, that's a good time to just kind of remind them too.
Yeah.
But a little pro tip, and I give this in the book, so I don't even know if it's a pro tip now. It's not a secret tip, for sure. But always give yourself a little bit of homework. So one of the things that I used to do in meetings, because you just get so many of them, and people come in and they're like, this is a priority number 10 for us. It has to be done. And you're like, okay. And so what I would usually do is give them a little bit of homework so that we can get the ball rolling. And I was amazed at the amount of people who would just never follow up. So it's this is the thing that I said I would do, but this is what you promised that you would do too. And then they just never do it. So the best advocates will say, Patrick, thank you so much for taking the time. I'm going to send you those stats. So be on the lookout for an email and I'll send it to you. And so once, it doesn't matter if it takes 2 weeks for you to get the stats or 3 weeks, you are back at the top of my inbox. And so now I'm being triggered to, if I haven't been working on this project for you, it's now back on my task list.
Yeah. So when you say things that are searchable and that they can use, what kind of things does that include? Like just making sure that the name of the thing isn't untitled number 48 or...
Exactly. Like if you're sending bill numbers, please don't be the person that just sends us bill numbers. Like the most stressful time in any staffer's life is like a markup when there are like 15 bills and you're just like, I don't know the numbers. And I mean, this is like legislation that I've like loved and I wrote it and it's like, who knows what these bill numbers are? And so it's also like, you know, make sure if it's searchable, like in the title, your organization's name is on there. But you know, if it's about cybersecurity, put cybersecurity in there. So for people that are in the government affairs shop, you kind of want to have like the tagged keywords that we all know that are these big issues that if a staffer is looking for something, that's the word that they're going to be searching for.
Totally. One big thing that I see my clients do a lot in flyin is they will at the end direct them to the government affairs team that's in DC. Is that effective?
I think it's effective. But I will tell people it kind of depends on what you've been asking for. So, you know, if you've been, so in the book, I kind of break down the different locations that you should be making the majority of the asks. So if the asks that you are making are things that are going to be done at the personal office level or the state house level or the committees, then yes, connect the staffers with the people that are in DC, the people that are going to be working on these issues. But if it's something that's going to be done in an office, like a district office or a state office, those are the people that should be running point on that. Because sometimes as staffers, we get caught up in the like bureaucracy of different groups and all of their government affairs. And it's just the kind of thing that just drives you mad. And so that's just something on the front end to figure out internally within your government affairs team, like who is going to be running point on these issues and why that makes sense. And the thing about your advocates, they're more than welcome to send the follow-up email and say thank you and do whatever. They just also need to kind of copy. I always tell people, I'm like, I know they want to send the email. And the truth is those are usually the people that you've connected with the most about that meeting. So let them send the email, just make sure they're copying whoever the correct person is. And if it's easier for a government affairs office, you can also send the email and copy the person that was from the district or from the state or something like that. Because a lot of the times, this goes back to the stories, if we're doing what we do, and I didn't share this, but I'm like, you know, staffers love stories because we have to use them all the time. Like, you know, God forbid a member go down to the floor and just talk about a bill and they don't have a story to go with it. And so a lot of the times it is good for us to know who that contact was in the district, because when we're getting ready to use their story, we might need to reach out to them and see if it's okay, if we like redact some of the information. But members also love to say, and I met with Patrick from my district and we talked about X. So don't just completely remove them out of the process, but I understand from a logistical standpoint, if you want there to be a single person that you're doing kind of the majority of the communication with.
Totally. Yeah. One thing that I was surprised about is that our clients said that some of the most successful grassroots campaigns they run are just the tell us your story campaigns.
Yeah.
It doesn't really go anywhere. It's just, you know, you can then give it to members, and that's the really effective stuff.
Yeah. So on and I say our committee, but I also like I do staffer trainings and things. So you find out what other offices are doing too. Most offices create a folder where they literally have like constituent stories. The committees don't call them constituent stories, they're issue stories. And every subcommittee has their thing. Because if you think about just the nature of a markup, right? So you're going to have, if every member wants to talk about this, like you need 15 different stories, because they're all going to want to use their 5 minutes. They're going to always want to make something relatable. And then the process and the anatomy of a bill by the time you get to the floor, you need another story. And so to your point, I know now that I'm off the Hill, I'm aware of how many grassroots organizations, but also GR offices are collecting the stories, but they're just, something is happening where they're not actually transmitting them to the Hill. And so, yes, like story campaigns are great. And we know that if your organization becomes the kind of place where we can go to when we're like, hey, we do need you to send over like 10 really good stories. And, you know, especially if people are using Quorum and things like that to keep it organized, go ahead and say, all right, what states do you need the stories from? Or like, are there districts that you need the story from? Because that makes it even better for staffers.
Yeah. All right. So we're going to move over to Q&A. Down at the bottom of your screen, you should see a little button that says Q&A. It looks like we've gotten a good bit so far. So the first question is, if this is your industry's first fly-in, how much time should be given to introducing the association or industry during the meetings themselves, especially if they aren't really any pressing issues?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. I think you got to do a little bit of your homework, right? So if you're going into it, first of all, don't take for, or don't make an issue that staffers know if this is your first fly-in or your 50th. We kind of don't know, y'all. I mean, unless I've met with you 50 times, I don't know. And it doesn't matter. But what does matter is doing a little bit of your homework to see if that office has been engaged on the issue. So if the office has been engaged in your industry and on your issue, you probably don't need to start them at step one and explain to them like your association and things like that, because they probably are already a little bit familiar with it. I was just talking with a staffer last night, and she's like, I'm amazed at like how so many times, like, because also staffers see that I'm doing this training, they're like, you know what you should tell people? I'm like, sure. When staffers are already, when a member is really engaged on an issue, that means his staff is already really engaged on the issue. So you don't have to start from scratch. Now, if you're doing your basic homework, which is, you know, I've walked people in my book through this, like how to search where a member is on an issue and how active they've been. If nothing is coming up, then just go ahead and ask them. Like, it's totally fine to just say, hey, Patrick, we're here to talk to you today about X issue. I don't know, do you have some familiarity with it, or have you all been working on it? And that's totally fine. Like, a staffer will tell you, well, you know, it's kind of new, or I'm new to this, so do you mind giving me a little bit of background? And I think that's helpful too.
Totally. So a little bit of follow-up from that. What about like other meetings with media to explain issues or the reason you've flown in?
That's a good question. Now, I have to tell people, I was a policy wonk and a procedure wonk. So I was only allowed to talk to media under supervision of a press team.
Okay.
So,
Me too.
yes. I think with the media, it's probably a little bit different because their goals are different. So when you're meeting with staffers and members of Congress, you're talking to them about something that you actually need done in the State House or on Capitol Hill. I think with media, it's a little bit different because they are looking for like almost like an in, a way to kind of, I don't want to say sell it to the masses, but to make this an important issue for others, or, you know, maybe it's part of like an investigation that they're doing. And so I think it's just a different audience, and you have to just tailor it to that. So you might not be able to train an advocate for Capitol Hill and media at the same time. I know that's very disappointing to people.
So, quick question. PDFs or PNG? What is the better file format to send in follow-up?
Do not send PNGs.
No pictures, no PNGs?
I mean, if you're sending pictures, I shouldn't say that. All right, that was like a really hard line for me to say. We can send PNGs, but it's tough for us to like search them. We can't really edit them. The technology is very limited on Capitol Hill. So you can send whatever you want, but just make sure it's something that we can also search too. And you can send multiple attachments. You know, zip the file if you're like about to blow up someone's inbox. But that was a very technical question. And I'm like,
yes.
This is a great example too. Like I was like a staffer. So I'm like, if I can put a word into my inbox and find it, you can send it in that format.
Okay.
Yeah. If I can't, don't send that.
Makes sense. So this is a question about if you don't have people in the members' districts, should you still try to meet with them? If so, who should you try to pair? What should you try to do?
Yeah. So that's a really good question. And I feel like I'm like a vacuum cleaner salesman where I keep trying to tell people like I have a vacuum that can pick up dog hair and curly hair. So I keep going back to my book, but I talk about this in the book. You didn't know where you're going. I talk about this in the book. The priority is to get people that can cast a vote for the member, right? But the truth is we understand that sometimes that is not what the priority is for the member. So, you know, if there's a member that has been actively engaged in a positive way on an issue that's important, you can still go into that office. But what I caution people against doing, like, don't lie about it. Like, you need to be upfront about it, and you need to say, we don't have anyone from the district, but we know this is an issue that your member has been passionate about for years. And most of the time, the staff is still going to take that meeting.
Makes sense. So you've talked about how staffers' time is crazy. Can you give me a rundown of what a staffer's day-to-day schedule might look like and how lobby days meetings fit in there?
I cannot do that because no 2 days are the same. But if I could, I always tell people if I had one word to describe a staffer's day, the word would just be overwhelming. Like you are overwhelmed with information. Your days start, 6 a.m. and you're trying to read as much as you can before you get to the office, but then you get to the office and you're still reading, you're still meeting people. One of the things I have this little straw poll that I do with staffers, and they're like, tell people if they're coming in and we gave them a 30-minute slot, the way to our heart is to do a 20-minute meeting, right? And so it's because they're overwhelmed. They're like following their bosses. They are also not just talking to advocates, not just talking to members of Congress. There's also a lot of staff communication that is happening. I think people think I'm joking when I say this, but my inbox, the average of my inbox was 400 to 500 messages a day. Because also I have to remind people, especially on Capitol Hill, and I know some of the state houses might be different on this, but we also don't really get to filter our emails. So even something as simple as Google is sorting out promotions and social and all this stuff. The way the House and the Senate is set up, it's only so much filtering you can do because we don't want to miss emails from constituents who have never emailed us before. And maybe it does look a little fishy, but it's still an email that needs to get through. So you can only set your filter so strong when you work in the House and the Senate. And so I can't do a typical day because there isn't a typical day. But what I can say is they are overwhelmed. So anything you can do to make it easier to help them help you is going to be success. That is what success looks like.
We have somebody with a question about they accept all advocates to come to their fly-in, regardless of the congressional district. And there are some members who are a bit hostile to their issues. Do you have any recommendations about meetings with folks that aren't an ally of yours?
Yeah, I think you have to do those meetings too. I know, gonna always be candid with people. Those meetings are hard. But I think the training that has to happen there is making sure your advocates are not going into a meeting and being hostile with the staffers or being hostile with the members. Here's the thing. It's a crazy idea, but everybody doesn't agree with everything everyone does, right? It's crazy. But but as a staffer, you already know that. And so we used to meet, when we were on our committee, we took a lot of meetings that were bipartisan meetings from a staff level, but you get into the meetings and sometimes people would try to attack my Republican counterparts. And I'm like, that's not how we're going to get this done. Like we can't get this through our committee until we get on the same page about this. And so it's fine to go into, it's fine. And I do encourage people to meet with people who are on the other side, but then try to have a genuine meeting. Like try to talk to them through the issue, talk to them why they're opposed. And no, you may leave and not, air quote, have changed their mind, but you've made an impact on the office because at least you showed up to like talk about it and you were respectful.
Yeah. Let's close our eyes for a minute and imagine that we are a very nervous advocate who's going in to meet with someone who they think, is against your issue. What kind of advice would you give them to really nail that meeting if they're super anxious about it?
Start with the words, I'm not here to attack you.
Okay.
Right. So the thing about hostile meetings is you get a lot of advocates that just immediately come in and I think people think it's going to be house of cards and they're like ready. And we're like sitting on the other side of the table being like, no, like my job is not to come to work and be attacked. My job is not to come to work and attack other people. And most of the times the staffers that you're meeting with, they're not walking into these meetings blind. So they probably already know that you all are on different sides of the issue. It doesn't hurt to reiterate that.
Great. Yeah. So here's a question about Quorum specific stuff. What capacity does Quorum have to provide mobile info to participants? They want them to have info like agenda, member bios, fact sheets, and general info. I think that's where our download center really comes into play, where you can download one-pagers with pretty much all that information. Then you can also provide your own custom info, so you can create some of those one-pagers like Nicole was talking about there.
Yeah, and I'm one of those people. I'm like, not only do I love Quorum webinars that feature me, I'm also a Quorum client. And so one of the things that you all do, which I wish we knew about Quorum and used this in the capacity on the Hill, you all can, on the one-pagers in the download center, you all have a feature where you can sort legislation that they've introduced or they co-sponsored based off the specific issues. Those are really good to add to the one-pager because you may be going in to talk about one bill, but if you can say, and also you've done like 10 bills on cybersecurity this Congress, so we know you're pretty active. Now the staffer is not going to remember the bill numbers and everything, but they'll remember, we have done like 10 bills on cybersecurity. So thank you for bringing that up. And then you'll have the one pager with the bill numbers and the names.
Yeah. Love to hear it. I have a question here about local service providers. What ways can people like photographers and those in DC already take advantage of existing fly-ins? Like what kind of services can they provide? What kind of, or if you are running a fly-in, who should you be talking to like get those services that you need to really maximize your fly-in?
I think I would probably refer those people to the government affairs professionals that are organizing the fly-in. But I think there is such a shared synergy there. So a lot of the times when you're doing these fly-ins, like, yes, you have a lot of advocates coming to the Hill, but of course, members and their staff go and they speak on panels and they do keynotes and things like this at their policy conference that are going on at the same time. Don't forget that in the private sector, you have access to a lot of professionals that we don't have access to. Like our press team was not following me to a conference to talk about policy and take pictures of me or like snippets of me talking. But I loved when associations would have me come and speak on a panel and they're like, oh yeah, as a follow-up, we took pictures of you while you were talking, because everybody needs to add stuff to their LinkedIn, like showing like I have a real job and I do work. And so for those type of professionals, I would say make sure you're getting plugged in with the GR teams that are organizing the fly-ins. And then for the GR team, like that's a unrequested favor that ethics is not going to like have a problem with you doing, where you thank a member or you thank a staff. Because even sometimes when the members are coming to speak at your conferences and things like that, the staffer that's with them is their policy person. And like, I have yet to take a good picture of a member of Congress on my iPhone. Yeah. So if someone from the conference will follow up, you'll also get a lot more leeway out of that too, right? Because now they're probably going to put you on their social media. Now they're going to maybe even include like a snippet of the conversation that you were having with the member in their constituent newsletter or something like that. So you can use your fly-in to build relationships and get a lot of coverage out of a sound snippet or a photo.
Yeah, I love when I'm in trainings with folks and then we go through the documents data set and show the tweets and Facebook posts that people have, and it's actually pictures of them with the member. They're like, oh, get that off the big screen. I can't.
No, it's true. Offices look for those materials. So you have different people that they need those kind of visuals. They also need that kind of audio, and people repurpose things all the time.
Yeah. So do you have any recommendations on best practices for preparing advocates for their fly-in? Like, not just like what materials to provide them, but if you're running a workshop beforehand, what kind of things are you telling them?
So what I like to do with the workshops, I'm always happy to do a 1-hour workshop, but I always tell people if someone, hires me to come in and do a 1-hour workshop, I'm only going to present for 15 minutes because I really need to do this. I need us to have 45 minutes of Q&A so people can ask me exactly what they need to know, what they're nervous about, and things like that. And so as people are planning, I think and I know time is of the essence, and the idea that someone wants to be at like an advocacy training, they probably just really despise anybody that even says that to them, but they really do need a little bit of time to practice. Like even for us, we're a good example. I know these issues. I wrote a book on these issues. I do it every day. We still practiced yesterday just to kind of like, all right, let's not go into this cold. And so if you can find an advocacy trainer that will like talk to you about what to do, but then also be allowed to set aside some time and be like, all right, y'all, let's practice. Like, let's sit down. And you're in a safe space. So I can say, you're giving me too many stats, Patrick. Like I need you to like narrow down to like your favorite one. And let's just kind of go from there. So trying to give your advocates as much time as they can to practice. And you don't have to do it all in one day, right? Like you can do webinars before they come, and you can even do like mock conferences. I think it's better when you don't have people doing one-on-one. So like you all can't see us, but there are 5 of us in here. And so like if you have 4 of us in here, I can't count. If you have 4 or 5 of your advocates sitting down at one time, and it's like, all right, let's one person practice, we'll do handoffs. They can also hear what other people are doing wrong and kind of tailor their stuff to it. So practice kind of does make perfect on some of this stuff.
And have to say, without Satya and Cyrus, the other 2 people in the room, this would have never happened. So do members mind if we take photos during the visit? How can we make it not awkward?
So this is always the way to do this is to ask for in a meeting. You should keep in mind, like, if advocates are coming for a fly-in, they're excited, they're prepared, their hair is done. Like the idea is you just want to ask for permission rather than just kind of doing it. Like I've been in meetings and people are like standing up to take I don't know if they're taking pictures. I don't know if they're making video, but I'm also like, we had a markup this morning, so I've been up since 5 a.m. I would like to not be on anyone's social media. And so you can do it. You just need to ask for permission on the front end. But timing wise, I think it's always a little bit, and I know sometimes people don't want the like picture at the end where everybody is like standing around and pose. Sometimes people want the candidates. If you're going to do a candidate and you've gotten permission, go ahead and do it. You need to get it out of the way, like in the first 1 minute, take the candidate so everybody can calm down. Like, don't really be on the heel taking real candidates. Like, or you wait till the end and like stage a candidate, but you can't just like pop up and do that. And I've been in meetings and I'm just like, it just messes with the flow. Like it's now it's awkward. So get permission, do it early. Or get permission, do it early, or do it at the end, but don't actually go to the hill and take candid photos. Don't do that. Don't be that person.
All right. So that's about it for Q&A. I just wanted to give you a chance to talk a little bit about what you do, talk about your book, talk about the workshops you provide and stuff like that.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank Quorum for giving me this platform to come and kind of talk about this today, but then also thanks to all of the participants for joining in. My business and my book all have the same goal. I really I'm a geek in that I love democracy, but I also just want people to understand advocacy from a staffer's perspective. And I want people to have access to this information. The book started with the idea that, you know, maybe if people knew the different advocacy asks that they could be making, everyone wouldn't come to the Hill and ask for a bill to be introduced. And so I am a former substitute teacher and a college tutor. And so I've always enjoyed teaching people. And I do now, I've made a career out of it where I go out and I do advocate training if people are having a fly-in. But also I think too, if your government affairs shop just kind of needs like a little bit of a refresh, or they want someone to come in and just kind of say, hey, this is what we're thinking about doing for our fly-in.
Yeah.
Poke some holes in it. Like, tell us what we could be doing better. Because I know, you know, some people are trying to plan fly-ins during a presidential election year. Like, should you be asking for the same thing during that year as you do, like, when there is the first session of a new Congress? There are all these elements that go into a fly-in. And so that's what I try to help people do. Like, if you all have decided that you want to engage and you want to advocate, then I try to make that as easy as possible by sharing as much information as I can.
Perfect. Love it. All right. So that's about it for us. You'll be able to get a recording of this webinar after a brief survey at the end of this webinar. Oh, looks like it's up right now. Thank you, Satya. Thank you all so much for joining. It's been a pleasure speaking to you today.
Yeah, thank you all so much for joining, and thank you, Quorum, for hosting.
Of course, of course.